What's up YouTube, Capital G here. Welcome to another episode of the Excellent Adventures. These are the Excellent Adventures of Kaitoons, and that's gonna sound like a really weird deck, and believe me, once you see it on paper, it is hella weird. So what is Kaitoons? This is essentially a Toon variant, but it has a bunch of Kaijus in it, and I know you guys are like, well, how the hell do those two things work together? Just wait until you actually see some of the duels. The pop-offs of this deck is actually pretty impressive. Now, I will just say in advance, this deck is super fucking linear. You cannot grind with this deck, and you basically need the win within the first couple of turns. Otherwise, you're probably going to lose. You don't really have that many disruption cards because obviously Toons weren't really blessed with that many great disruption cards. So your Kaijus are your main source of disruption if your opponent has a problem, boss monster or something like that on the field. And these are definitely not competitive duels. You see, obviously on the other side, we have a Blue Eyes White Dragon type deck. I believe this is a Chaos Max variant because he has Mandu in his opening hand. So yeah, don't take these as like the gospel, like, oh my goodness, Cap G, these will be top and read. No. These are just fun matches showing you guys the concept. And the cool thing about this deck is it's a Toon deck that actually OTKs, which in itself is like, how does that even work, Cap? Like, Toons can't attack the turn that they're summoned. Aha! There are no Toon monsters in this deck. So you're actually going to be OTKing your opponents without even running any Toon monsters, which a lot of you guys are like, Kappa, what are you even talking about? So let's go ahead and roll this. And actually, one more thing before I do, one of the cool things about this deck as well is the fact that you can actually OTK your opponent a lot of times using their monsters if they're foolish enough to go first and put something on the field that is extremely strong, as obviously Blue Eyes White Dragon and all of its variants are known to do. So Blue Eyes is up first. I believe he's going to drop Chaos Max in this turn and Dark Matter Dragon, but him summoning all these big monsters is actually going to cause his own demise. That's just an interesting thing about this Kaiju deck, is it just wants to go second, and it kind of preys on its opponents putting big monsters on the board. So you see he has two 4,000 attackers, Chaos Max, and then he has the Dark Matter Dragon, gets a Spirit Dragon of Whites, and him summoning those, obviously Blue Eyes is not known to have a bunch of defensive cards. He's going to die by his own sword. He activates the Toon Kingdom, and this is the first card that pretty much does him in. He activates Shadow Toon, which if you guys don't know what this card, it's kind of like a Toon version of Ring of Destruction of sorts. Basically, you target a face-up monster your opponent controls, and then you inflict damage directly to them, equivalent to the attack of that monster. It's a once per turn, but obviously if your opponent puts a fucking 4,000 attack monster on the board, your opponent just loses 4,000 attack. So I mean, the game's half over. And then he says, you know what, I'm gonna just go ahead and take your monster, activates Cosmic Hand, or excuse me, not Cosmic Hand, Comic Hand, which is basically a snatch steal that is specific for Toons, but in addition to it taking the opponent's monster, it actually lets you attack directly. This is a lot of times how you kill your opponent with the Kaijus that you give them. Alright, so let's go ahead and load another one up. I think some of these are by the opponent's monsters, but I think for the most part, a lot of them are going to be with Kaiju. This one is a BLS hybrid variant. Obviously, that's not a very impressive turn one. A lot of times when I watch these plays, I try and think about how competent the turn one play is, and I'm like, bro, if you just go to summon a Gaia Knight, that is not very strong. But he gives his opponent the Kaiju, he burns him with the Shadow Toon, and then after using Mage Power, which obviously counts field spells as well, he activates the Comic Hand, which is another equipped card, and his Kaiju is it's well over 4,000 attack. It's easily able to just win the duel right then and there, and let's keep it rolling. A lot of these replays, guys, are going to be like extremely quick because this deck doesn't have a grind game. You don't play any traps or anything like that. And I mean, I guess there could be a situation where you run into maybe a field of like a bunch of disruption and stuff like that, but things like D-Barrier and Solemn Strike don't really affect this deck. Now, I think this was a dumb play, leaving Geldagra on the field after you paid 3,000 life points. You're asking for something bad to happen. And again, if your opponent plays something like Chaos Max that can't be targeted, it's not a big deal, because obviously you can always target Kaiju monsters. So even hypothetically, if you're playing against a deck like Magic Specters, or your opponent has Chaos Max or Dark Destroyer or something like that, all you have to do is just tribute said monster and then use your Kaiju to kill them. And actually right here, you see the Kaiju is almost 8,000, 7,300 attack. Like, the Mage Powers are actually pretty bonkers in this deck, because if you activate 2 Mage Powers, your attack pretty much goes through the roof, because you're always going to have you're always going to have Toon Kingdom on the field, and you're always going to have the Comet Can. So it's like you're guaranteed to have at least a couple of spells and traps on the field. So usually when you play Mage Power, it's going to be, well, it has to be a minimum of 1,500. I mean, if you don't have all the other Toon cards, you're going to lose anyways. You see right here, he activates, he plays Mega Morph. Oh my god. He kills him with Megamorph, bro. I haven't seen Megamorph OTK since the GX days of like Cyberstein OTK and the Devise OTK. So yeah, sometimes you actually don't need the burn card. That's actually pretty crazy. And this is actually the last duel. I know this is a little bit short for the Excellent Adventures, but it's simply because the duels with this deck are not going to be very long. A lot of them are going to be over by turn 1. Here's a duel against Kozmo, and as I said before, if your opponent does have a big untargetable spaceship, obviously you can Kaiju it away, but it's even better if your opponent doesn't have any back row, as obviously this guy kind of bricked, because you can just get rid of the Wicked Witch, and they won't even have a chance to summon that said Dark Destroyer, which is exactly what's going to happen here. And a deck like this, obviously, as I said, it can't grind, doesn't really have a backup plan. You either OTK them with their monster or you OTK them with your monster, and that's pretty much how it is going to be. There's not a lot of back row removal. Actually, you know what? Let me just show you guys the deck, because again, this is a short one. So let me, whoopsie, that's the replay option, not trying to go there. There we go. So there's not a lot of back row removal in this deck, but you could probably, and if you didn't want to play Cosmic Cyclones, you could easily take these out for Twin Twisters. You're not going to have, like, you're going to have some unnecessary cards. You see a lot of times that his damage cap was well over 8,000, so you generally don't need a lot of cards to pull off this the OTK. Sometimes you'll just have dead cards in your hand. You'll have another copy of something like Comic Hand, where you're not going to be able to use that, like 2 of them in a turn. You'll have another copy of like Toon World or maybe Shadow Toon or something like that. That's a hard once per turn. Maybe you have an Into the Void that you didn't activate. You can just discard those cards for Twin Twisters if you wanted to upgrade from the Cosmic Cyclone. Now, One Day of Peace is in here. I know a lot of people might be looking at that as kind of like a weird card and be thinking, Cap, why would you run One Day Apiece in a deck that basically has to win turn 1? One Day Apiece, and like, it's kind of in there for the same reason that Pot of Duality is in there. It's kind of just to help you if you happen to have a brick hand, because keep in mind, you're running 3s of basically all these shitty Toon cards, and these shitty Toon cards only work if you're able to either get a Kaiju on board, or if you're able to just have one of your opponents like really big monsters like a Crystal Wing that you can basically snatch deal. So if you ever find yourself with a brick hand of like Toon World plus Comic Hand, maybe Shadow Toon and Hidden Armory or something like that, and they may have a card that stops you, maybe a way of stopping your equips, you might need to live for a couple of turns, or excuse me, you might need to live for another turn, or you might need to dig deeper into your deck to find multiple copies. The deck does run a bunch of equip cards. You do not normal summon in this deck, which is why Hidden Armory is in here, so that you can just grab Megamorph from your deck, so that you can grab Mage Power from your deck. You'll almost always have lower life points. I can't think of, unless your opponent is playing some type of deck where they're paying life points by going first or something like that. You do play Upstart Goblin, so your life points should be higher than your life points should always be lower than your opponent, and you're not attacking them unless it's pretty much for games. So you're going to just try to OTK them. So basically a kind of basic deck. Everything that you could think of, all the good Toon cards are pretty much ran at 3. None of the other janky cards, what was that card? I think Toon Briefcase is the trap card. You don't run any of that. It's actually a shame that people have never really been able to experiment with Toons casually, or at least if you want to IRL, like, you have to invest a lot of money, because I'm probably gonna sound stupid, but I don't believe that Toon Kingdom, where are you, Toon Kingdom? I don't believe Toon Kingdom has been reprinted, and I looked at this card, I looked it up on TCG Player a while ago, and it was so effing expensive, because obviously the rest of the deck is like super dirt cheap, especially since Into the Void just got reprinted. Pot of Desires got reprinted as well, or at least it's about to be reprinted in just a few weeks now. And then again, you can pretty much substitute your Cosmic Cyclones for Twin Twisters if you find yourself facing against maybe some meta decks, or just decks that have a bunch of back row and you need a little more removal. Also, it should be pretty obvious, but I'm just going to go ahead and state you do not need an extra deck with this. So you can play a little bit of mind games with your opponent, be thinking, oh, am I playing Domain Monarchs or something like that? You know what I mean? And it's actually pretty cool Duel because I just can't think of many decks in Yu-Gi-Oh that want to go second, and this is one of the few decks that wants to go second. Obviously because it's kind of a trash tier deck that basically has to win by turn 1 or turn 2, or it can't win. But I don't know, I am just kind of naturally attracted to decks that like to go second because I like having that 6 card, man. You set up your board and I'll just knock it down and then I'll OTK. You could also probably put in a Regeki as well. The side deck is pretty much just up to you. The side deck can be whatever you want. You could even side into just playing Toons if you want. I mean, I wouldn't, because I think that the Toon deck is way too fragile, because if you lose this card, you basically lose the Duel. But, you know, your imagination is basically the limitation of the side deck, or you could actually make an extra deck and just not use any of the cards, so your opponent thinks you're playing a meta deck. It's all kind of up to you. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. As always, if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up and just leave whatever you thought in the comment section below. I don't know if I'm going to have this on Imager because I don't think that there's really a point to this, but for those of you who don't want to take the time to actually have to build a deck, because I honestly find that to be tedious and annoying, I will of course have the download link maybe if you just want to mess around or whatever. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already.